Look, it's the Prophecy Brothers.
Welcome to another edition of the Prophecy Brothers. I'm Brother Man with Brother
Champion
tonight. And tonight we have a special guest, Thomas Short, and we're going to be talking about some end time prophecy. Okay, before we get into that though, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping stuff. Visit our website. There's free downloads. We're going to have Thomas's PDF on there, his teaching on the living in the last days, correct?
That is the correct name.
You can download that for free. We also have articles on there. You can see past shows, and we have products. So if you see anything on there that you like and you need anyway and you want to kind of support what we do, feel free to do it. If not, that's okay too. So we're just going to go ahead and jump into this. Unless you have something to say.
Welcome. All right. We'll go ahead. But yeah, this is Thomas Short, and we met, or well, we were referred to him by a friend, Minister Sterno, and basically I start reading through your course here. It's called Living in Last Days, and I knew, okay, well, I didn't read through the whole thing, but I was searching through here, underlying things, and I could see, okay, well, you're a Bible scholar, and this is really strong information. This is what people need to hear, and I guess we'll let you start with what you want to talk about. And
well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and I know you're on the radio as well, and you have a church out in Elkhart, and so maybe tell us about your background and what you do.
Well, I've been a minister for about 30 years, and I've been in this area for a little over 20 years now. I'm currently the minister at the Elkhart East Christian Church, which is technically Bristol, but we're so close to the line of Elkhart, we think of ourselves as being in Elkhart. But I have had a radio ministry that kind of parallels my church ministry for a little over 12 years now. It's called Into the Word, and it's just day by day, 5 days a week on WHME 103.1, and we do it 11:30 and 11:30 in the evening as well, and we just go verse by verse through the entire Bible, and we start in Genesis, finish up in Revelation, and then we just start all over again. So I'm on my fourth time through that. But my whole goal is to try to help people to be better Bible literate. That's what I want. And so several years ago, I was thinking, everything that I know about eschatology, I kind of picked up out of books somewhere, but some of it I felt a little uncomfortable with. I'm like, I'm not so sure I agree with that guy. And others I'm like, I'm pretty sure he overstated things. And so I thought, you know what, I think I just need to go and research this stuff out on my own. I have the capability. I can read in Greek and in Hebrew. So I thought, I'm going to just start with those passages that I know without a shadow of a doubt. These are about the second coming of Jesus and things related to it. And then I'm going to particularly pay attention to some of the wording, the phrases, and the quotations, particularly from Old Testament. And I'm going to start chasing all those different rabbit trails and just let's see where it leads me. And this prophecy seminar is pretty much the result of that. And I have taught it several different times, and I've tweaked it a little bit here and there, but I'm fairly satisfied with the information that came out of it. The approach that I did take, and this is mentioned in the introductory part to it, is that we know that there are certain prophecies that have already been fulfilled, because the Scripture in particular tells us that. So that's a model that we can look at and say, okay, this is how these prophecies were fulfilled. And we've got other prophecies that we were pretty sure that they've been fulfilled, things out of Daniel that took place during the time of the Maccabees. And we can kind of look at what the prophecy was and how it was fulfilled, and we can draw some lessons from that. And then once we've kind of packed all that together, we can then start saying, okay, here are some things that have not yet been fulfilled. How might they be fulfilled? And that base that we picked up earlier can kind of instruct us on how to understand these other prophecies. So that was the beginning of it. But I also warn people at the very beginning, prophecy is an in-house discussion. It's not something to fight about in the church. When we go into the presence of the Lord, He's not going to go, you were wrong on prophecy, you're out of here. That's not what it's all about. We know that prophecy, more than anything else, is to let us know that God is well aware how things are going to play out. Jesus told His disciples, I'm telling you all these things that are going to happen. This was what He was saying on the night before He went to the cross. I'm telling you all these things ahead of time so that when they do happen, you will know that I am. And He uses that divine name. Right. So that's really what prophecy is. It's an authentication of who God is, that He knows the end from the beginning. He's never caught off guard by anything, and He can weave everything together to bring about the good that He intends for us.
Now, Christians, you say we can fight about or argue.
Yeah, we can debate.
Debate about exactly what prophecy means, when it's going to happen, things like that. But really, what you're saying is we should keep the main thing the main thing.
That is correct.
That's what Jesus said, is to spread the word and make disciples and everything.
That's the big thing.
That's the main thing.
And we need to not be mean and vicious to one another. One of the things that we find from Scripture about prophecy is you don't really know what was going to happen until it's happened. And sometimes even then we have to be told specifically, oh, this is the fulfillment of that. So it's really counterproductive for us to theorize and then debate and argue and fight about our theories as if it's fact, because you won't know how it plays out until it's played out. For example, the Jewish leadership, particularly the Pharisees, they thought they had it all sorted out, exactly how prophecy was going to be fulfilled with the coming of the Messiah. They were sure the Messiah was going to show up in a certain way, and that He was going to do this, that, and the other thing. Jesus shows up. He fulfills an awful lot of the prophecy, but not in the way they expected it.
Yeah.
In fact, they rejected Him.
Right, and He even says something about, they missed the time of their visitation.
That is correct. That's in the day that He cries over the city of Jerusalem.
Right. Okay.
When He's coming in, and He says, if you only knew the day of your visitation, but you don't. And because of that, you're going to lose your city. They're going to build siege ramps up against you, and basically He predicts the destruction of Jerusalem will happen about 38 years after the time He rode in. So yeah, they missed it. They were ready to fight about it, but they missed it. And so I think we need to learn a lesson from that, so that even when I talk about some of the things I talk about, I say, I might be right on this stuff, might be wrong.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, I'm just looking forward to Jesus Christ coming back and finishing this whole thing.
Now, eschatology, that's the study of
last things. You can kind of recognize that ology ending from biology and geology.
Study of.
Yeah, study of. So eschatos is the Greek word for last.
Okay.
So eschatology is just the study of last
and
things.
Is that a recent term? Who coined that, or has that been around for a while?
It's been around for a couple of centuries at least. It might be earlier than that, but I know in English, I think it popped up right around the same time as the Protestant Revolution, I believe.
Okay, like I told you earlier, I'm really ignorant and new to all this, and I just, before I had saw your course and your teaching, I guess I just hadn't heard of that word before, but...
It gets thrown around in the ministerial circles,
Okay.
and in particularly prophecy buff people too talk about it a lot. And they really do mean, when they're talking about it, the study of Jesus' second coming and the things that are really closely associated with that.
Okay. Now, your course, if I remember right, was it a 4-hour course or 8-hour? How long was it? Was
it
all
actually,
day, or?
we set aside about 12 hours, I think, and I
okay.
still didn't get through all the material.
Okay.
When I've taught this on the radio program, I have sometimes taken an entire month in order to get through all the material, which at half an hour for each of the programs, that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right.
You wanted to focus in, there was a particular, it was a discovery that you made about, I'm trying to remember your email about the Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah, Battle of Armageddon. Most people, when they talk about the Battle of Armageddon, there's a couple of things they understand. They think about, well, first of all, let's talk about the popular culture thing. They think Armageddon means end of the world, and we even have movies and things done. Asteroids are coming in, so it's Armageddon. But in Revelation, chapter 16, verse 16, is where you actually see that word. And it's talking about how the last world ruler, the rotten guy, sometimes referred to as the Antichrist. I like to talk about him as being the beast leader. And his right-hand guy, the false prophet. And their generals, all the people working for them, they start gathering their forces to a place called Armageddon in order to have one last final stand to stop Jesus from coming back. That's the picture there. When many of our prophecy teachers have looked at this, they look at the word Armageddon and they recognize the Hebrew word, Aramaic possibly, har, as meaning mountain. And then the other component in it, they look at it and say, oh, that's Megiddo. That's the city of Megiddo, which is about 60 miles north and a little bit west of Jerusalem. And it was a place that there have been some battles in the past because it's a gap in a mountain line, a ridge.
Okay, it's a mountain, but there's also a valley, the Valley of Jezreel.
That's right. The Valley of Jezreel is a little bit to the north and over to the east of this gap that Tel Megiddo, that's the modern site that we refer to it as. It overlooks this gap where if you're trying to bring your forces through there, you have to go right past that.
Right. I've seen pictures of that where it's just...
Oh, yeah.
where it's a real big, like a field.
There's a big plain below.
Right. So if you're on a mountain, well, you can see this big
That's
field.
right.
You can see everything that's going on there, so you can see where, if there's a bunch of armies coming in, or if you're up on top, you can see everybody coming in there.
Yeah, you refer to it as a choke point. It's a military choke point. And so a lot of the people said, oh, this is all about that mountain, Megiddo, as being the place where this final battle is going to take place. And I had, seen that in writings and things, and I was like, that seems like a long ways from Jerusalem. Because when you're reading the book of Revelation, everything seems to climax at Jerusalem. I mean, you have the two witnesses who have been God's guys right there at Jerusalem. They are killed at Jerusalem. It says that specifically. They're killed in the place where their Lord was crucified. And that's where they resurrect and everything else. So everything seems to revolve around Jerusalem as the climactic point. And so I always wondered, why in the world would the fight take place 60 miles away? That doesn't make any sense to me. And it just so happened when I was doing all this research that I told you earlier, I was working in the book of Zechariah. The last 3 chapters in the book of Zechariah are clearly about the final days. There's just no doubt about it. And when I do my research, as I told you, I try to work in the original languages. So I'm reading through it in the Hebrew, and I'm also looking in the Septuagint because Greek is my better language. And so I'm looking through that as well. And I notice in chapter number 12, there is a place where the English Bible versions talk about Megiddo. And so, I kind of perked my ears up over that. But then I'm looking in the Greek. The Greek doesn't use the word for the city of Megiddo. And I'm like, well, I wonder what that is about. And so I read a little bit more, and I looked over in the Hebrew, and I noticed something. I noticed that in the Hebrew, the word for Megiddo ended with the letter N. It's the word, the letter Nun in Greek, or in Hebrew.
Oh, yeah, and I didn't bring my, I got the Hebrew letters, but I didn't bring it with me.
Well, yeah, but the thing was that the Hebrew actually says Megidon with the final N sound. And I thought, well, is that the way it ever appears anywhere else?
And the Hebrew letters, okay, I noticed that the recent Bible class where we're looking up the Hebrew words, and like the Strong's Concordance, which would will give
very useful.
It'll give the letters in Hebrew, and I forget what verse it is. It was in Genesis, where it said, okay, well, two of these words were the same word according to the Strong's translation, but when I look closer, they may be the same word, but there's two Hebrew letters that were different, even though it said it was the same word. Now each word or each letter has a symbol associated with it, and then okay, you mentioned the letter Nun. I think what the symbol would be like a fish.
Yeah, I think I was trying to remember exactly what it is.
I forgot to bring that. But
yeah, it's passed out of my head right now. But the thing is, I ask the next question that I always do when I'm researching, and is, does this happen anywhere else? Is there any other place where the word Megiddo ends with a letter N? So I checked every other place that Megiddo appears in the Old Testament, which there's 11 places other than this, and never. In none of those other places did it have an N on it. But in those other places, the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, definitely identified it as Megiddo, the site.
And that's in Zechariah.
This is Zechariah chapter 12 that we're talking about here. And so when I come across places like that, I'm like, okay, what did the Septuagint guys know that I'm not seeing here? Because remember, these guys are translating the Bible from Hebrew into Greek for the very first time shortly after Alexander the Great started encouraging the Jewish people to use Greek as one of their languages as well. So these guys actually grew up with both languages, both reading and writing and speaking. And so they definitely ought to know the language. So what did they do in the Zechariah passage? They translated it as cutting. And I'm like, cutting? Okay, well that kind of makes sense because Megiddo is like a pass, so there's a cut there. But then all of a sudden, something clicked in my head. I went, wait a second. In chapter number 14 of Zechariah, we read about the Mount of Olives splitting in two. And I'm like, a split and a cut is very similar.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I started putting two and two together. I'm like, oh my goodness, if these guys are like gathering in the place where the Mount of Olives have split, that would be a cut mount. And Armageddon would work very well there. And then all of a sudden it made much more sense to me that what these enemies are doing is they are setting up all their forces immediately east of the city of Jerusalem, trying to stop Jesus from touching down, as he said he would do.
We know where he's coming. He's coming to the Mount of Olives.
And so do they.
Yeah.
And, okay, I always wondered about that, where, Armageddon, okay, that's a mountain, but, okay, they always, try to say, well, okay, they're going to be in this valley. Okay, well, it's not the mountain.
Yeah.
So, okay,
But
well,
now we've
here's
got,
the mountain,
but we've got a mountain
Olives.
that is split,
Yeah.
which has a cut through it now, and these guys are bivouacked right there in the valley, and that would certainly qualify as it being the Battle of Armageddon, the Battle of Split Mountain or Cut Mountain.
And as far as the word goes, okay, the thing that differentiates that is that one Hebrew letter.
Just that one letter. And like I said, I ran across it by accident just because I was reading in the same context. I was reading in the book of Zechariah, which is where the splitting of the Mount of Olives takes place. But I was just a couple of chapters back from that. But it's still the same context. And so I have taught since then, I really do believe that it's much more comfortable to think about the Battle of Armageddon taking place right there at Jerusalem, trying to stop Jesus from touching down on the Mount of Olives as he said he would. Because that's really what they're all about. They don't want him to come and claim his place as King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
The Antichrist, the beast, he's in the temple there.
You've got the beast who's trying to claim his own sovereignty over not just there, but over the whole world. And the false prophet that's trying to back him up on that. But Jesus comes in Revelation chapter 19, it's done. They're thrown into the lake of fire, and all those that have taken the mark of the beast and have put their lot in with them, they're gone as well. And so Battle of Armageddon isn't much of a battle in that sense.
There's their destruction, but the devil's tricking everybody up, up till that point. Okay, we're going to fight Jesus, and we're going to win.
We might win.
Okay, then instantaneously they're destroyed.
Yes. So that was what I was telling you about, is that I think that is something unique that I present in my teaching that I believe makes more sense than what the traditional teaching has been, putting it up at Tel Megiddo, about 60 miles away.
So what's your reaction been to this? With a lot of people, people that study this, are they going, aha?
A lot of the people do exactly like that. They say, oh, that makes kind of good sense. Because a lot of these guys that have talked to me, they said, I didn't understand why it was that far away as well. And when you read in some of the prophecy books and things, they will usually say that's where it's going to start, up at Tel Megiddo, and then it's going to spread and eventually come to Jerusalem. But again, I think it just makes much more sense to say it's all happening there in Jerusalem.
I have a feeling, okay, that letter, going back to that letter, because I've just been recently studying that stuff where, the letter, noon, I'm pretty sure it means a fish, but okay, don't have that. And they also have a number associated with it, but this based on what I looked at so far, doing the Hebrew, word studies, those symbols, really, go along with, what the Bible's, saying there. So, a fish, well, Jesus, calls to be fishers of men. Maybe there's something there. The Bible talks about, say like Gog and Magog. I think there's a hook in the jaw. I don't know, but
over in the Ezekiel passage,
right? So, and then I believe that we're seeing things going on in the world right now where a lot of preachers are saying that the countries that are supposed to be the Gog and Magog countries, or people that things are really lining up, say like Russia and Iran, or Persia, Turkey, and Syria, being Damascus is being destroyed right now. With all these this fighting going on. I mean, to me it seems like we're getting real close to a lot of these biblical things coming to pass. To me it seems like they are coming to pass.
It does seem that we're moving closer and closer to everything being in place for all of this. Now, I do believe that the Gog-Magog war takes place after the millennial period. And I'm a little out of step with some people on that. But I've got good reason for that. And I actually touch on that in my notes for this prophecy seminar. In a nutshell, it's basically this. In the Ezekiel passage, it talks about this Gog-Magog war taking place after the people have come back to the land, and that they are living in unwalled villages at peace. And I don't think there's anyone that would say that that describes Israel today. They have a great big wall, fence that's protecting them because of their terrorist problems. And they certainly don't feel themselves at peace. They feel themselves threatened all the time. So I feel that it fits much better with the Revelation passage where Gog Magog is mentioned as taking place after the millennial period.
Which is going to be a period of peace because Jesus is
That's right.
reigning.
Jesus is
king
ruling and
here on
reigning.
earth.
That's right. And it's during that period that we see the Zechariah chapter number 14 thing come to pass, where those who are in this millennial period are coming to Jesus during the Feast of Tabernacles every year, which kind of comes up with the other thing I told you that I was wanting to talk about, which I think is interesting, and that's kind of the timing that goes with the study of last things. The Feast of Tabernacles, which figures prominently in the millennial passage of Zechariah 14, is one of 3 mandatory observances for the Jewish men to participate in every year. The book of Exodus tells us this, book of Deuteronomy also. Those 3 were Feast of Tabernacles, then going backwards from there, Pentecost, and then the one that came first was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Passover. Now, those earlier feasts, Passover and Pentecost, we know that they were very much tied into the ministry of Jesus during his first coming.
Right.
So much so that Jesus fulfilled, or his church fulfilled, symbolic aspects on the exact day of some of these things. For example, the Passover took place on the 14th day of the first Jewish month in the spring. And it was the lamb that took away the death sentence for the Israelis. It just so happens Jesus was crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, on 14th day of the first Jewish month, because he was the Passover lamb.
Right.
So, boom, the symbol is fulfilled on the exact day of the calendar. 4 days before that, on the 10th day of Nisan, the Jewish people were told that they were supposed to bring their selected Passover lamb into their homes. This was the day they selected it, and then they'd spend 4 days with it before they sacrificed it. Well, guess what? On the 10th day of the first month of that year, that's the day Jesus entered Jerusalem. Exactly.
Okay, and I've heard preachers, I forget what book they're quoting from, but basically they're saying, okay, that was the fulfillment of Daniel. Talking about the day, the
yes,
day
there are some.
when Jesus.
There are some that do that.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, there's some that will do that. I would disagree with them on that. There are some problems with the calculations. There's some selective manipulation of the numbers, and I deal with that actually in the notes. And I would suggest that people kind of check that out and see what I deal with on that.
All right.
But so Jesus fulfills the Passover lamb by being selected on the 10th, and he comes into Jerusalem on that day. He is sacrificed on the 14th day. Well, the Sunday following Passover Sabbath was when the high priest would go out into the barley field, because barley was the first grain that would be ripened. And he would cut a sheaf of it, and he would bring it into the temple building, and he would wave it before the presence of God. And this was referred to as the first fruits offering. And we know that Paul refers to Jesus as the first fruits from the dead. And so Jesus resurrected, boom, exactly on that day. And so we've got boom, 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 3 real clear-cut, Jesus fulfilled these aspects of prophecy on the exact day that they were on the calendar. Now what would happen is 50 days from when that sheaf was waved before God as the first fruits, they would count 50 days, that 50th day, which would be another Sunday, from our way of describing it, first day of the week. they would offer the first sheaf from the wheat fields. And this became Pentecost. And it marked the beginning of the large wheat harvest. You couldn't go in harvest anything until that day came. And what do we know? On the 50th day after Jesus' resurrection, that is Pentecost, when the church was born, when the great harvest of souls started taking place, with the gospel being preached for the very first time by Peter.
Yeah, in the book of Acts, okay, well, it talks about day of Pentecost. So, Jesus ascends into heaven 40 days after the resurrection. So, okay, I was wondering about the timing of that.
So 10 days after that.
10 days, okay.
Is Pentecost.
Okay, right, okay.
And it all just kind of slides together with Jesus or his church fulfilling these key components of the spring feasts. But that only leaves us then the fall feasts. And so this is my thinking, is if God so very precisely fulfilled the symbolism of these feasts the first time, is it possible that he might fulfill these things on those exact same days for what's left?
Right.
Now, the Feast of Tabernacles does seem to be cited as being significant in the book of Zechariah. Now, what does the Feast of Tabernacles symbolize? It basically symbolizes that the Israelis had arrived in their promised land. They weren't out in the wilderness wandering anymore. They were at home. And so, Feast of Tabernacles does seem to symbolize that for believers, is that once everything is over in this world and the new heaven and new earth are put in place, we're out of the wilderness, we're at home, we're at rest. And so why wouldn't we have that as our big holiday every year to celebrate Jesus being King of Kings and Lord of Lords, just like it's described in Zechariah chapter 14.
So, yeah, the Bible talks about our bodies being, the tabernacle, or the temple, that the Holy Spirit dwells, in us now.
That's right.
The New Testament.
And we're going to get a new tabernacle.
So like the tabernacle, the tabernacle is before the temple here on earth. Okay, and then that was kind of a temporary type thing, where the temple was a more glorious, permanent type thing, where we receive our new bodies, or after we go to heaven, and there's going to be the resurrection. Okay, then that's when we receive this more glorious.
That's right. Paul even talks about we're unclothing so we can be clothed. We're putting off the old tent so we can put on the new tent. And also, the language in the book of Hebrews talks about how God is going to dwell with us. That's the English word that's usually used. But the Greek word actually means he's going to tabernacle with us. He's going to be right there with us. It was kind of a euphemism or an idiom that Jewish people used for talking about being in somebody's presence. So the Feast of Tabernacles does seem to tally with being fulfilled by being in the eternal presence of Jesus Christ. But there's two associated days on the Jewish calendar before the Feast of Tabernacles. The first of all, maybe I better give the dating system here. The Feast of Tabernacles takes place in the 7th month of the Jewish year, which is always in the fall. And it's from the 15th through the 22nd of the month. Now, on the first day of the 7th month, that day is referred to as the Feast of Trumpets.
Right.
And it was...
That's also... Okay, now they call it Rosh Hashanah, or the New Year.
It's the head of the year. That's right.
Okay.
The Jewish calendar actually has two starts to it, but this particular one is. This was the year. This is the more ancient of the two calendars. Was the first day of the 7th month, and it was associated with everything starting over again. The harvests had all come in by that date. Everything was finished, and you were actually getting ready to start your new agricultural cycle. This was when the sabbatical years would begin, with the beginning of the 7th month. This was when the ancient Jewish kings were inaugurated or celebrated their years of ascension. So it kind of matches all that. But I'm interested in the fact that it starts with a trumpet, because we know that when Jesus Christ comes back, he comes with a trumpet.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, is it possible? Now, we can't make any guarantees here, obviously, because nobody knows the day. But based on what we know has already happened in the past, is it possible that God will fulfill these symbols again
I've been
and have the trumpet blow on the seventh at the seventh month on the first day of that month?
The last trump, I think that's what it's called.
Refers to the last trump, yeah.
Well, yeah, I've been listening to some of the teaching of, I don't know if you heard of Mark Beltz. He had the book about the blood moons.
Blood moons, yes,
and
I'm
he's
aware
got
of
a lot of teaching about the Hebrew letters, and I was, going over some of that, and basically he was going back to the Bible, the English Bible. A lot of times they'll talk about the feast days. Okay, well, maybe it's not such a good translation. Maybe, he kind of says
That's true.
Well, maybe I think there's two words for that, but he was kind of describe it as that's kind of like a dress rehearsal, where he describes
yes.
they were rehearsing these things, and then when Jesus fulfilled the feast days that you're talking about, they were going over, they were going through the motions at the same time, like in the temple for the
right. They're getting ready
stuff. So
yeah, and dress rehearsal is probably not a bad idea for it, because pattern is a big thing for the Jewish people. Is that you have the pattern that is set, and then the fulfillment of that pattern later. And we can see that with a lot of things with Jesus. And so I would not be one bit surprised if the second coming of Jesus and the resurrection of the saints that takes place with the trumpet happens on the first day of the seventh month.
Just like, I forget the verse there, but it seemed like this fulfillment of Jesus, when he was, right after he was born, they went to Egypt. I forget what verse that there was talk about.
Out of Egypt have I called my son.
No, it didn't really seem like that was a prophecy, but it was a pattern.
That is correct.
That he was fulfilling.
Yeah, Jesus fulfills a lot of the symbolism that was laid down for Israel in the past.
Or say like Moses, he turned the water into blood, and it's one of the plagues, and then one of Jesus' first miracles, he turned the water into wine, which is associated with blood, which is, to me, that didn't seem like a prophecy, but that's a pattern.
Yeah, and that is exactly the word I think we should use, is the idea of a pattern. And the word about feasts that are translated in our English as feast, it's not about food. It is about, it's kind of related to the word for a circle, or for a cycle. And I think that's where some of the teachers have got this idea of a dress rehearsal, is that there is a cycle that you would go through in the year, but it's also the cycle of symbol and then fulfillment that's going to happen, which is what I saw here when I was doing my own studies, because I always start with what I'm thinking about it. And when I had been taught how Jesus fulfilled all the spring feasts, my next natural question that comes eventually is, well, what about those fall feasts? What about those fall incidents? And so I see the first day of the seventh month, the Feast of Trumpets, very likely going to be fulfilled by the last trumpet. And I see the Feast of Tabernacles, that's got to be being in the presence of Jesus out of this world. But there's one more day in between those two. The 10th day of the seventh month is Yom Kippur, which is, in our English, the Day of Atonement. And what would happen on that day is that the high priest would go into the holy place. That was the only time he went into the most holy place. And he would offer blood on behalf, first of himself, but also on behalf of all the people. And the principle that you see in the scripture is that if you do not have the blood offered by the high priest dealing with your sins, you are accountable for your own sin. And so We don't know any way that Jesus would have fulfilled that in his earlier ministry. But we do know how that is going to play out in a way at his second coming, and that deals with the Battle of Armageddon.
Okay.
The people who will die at the Battle of Armageddon are those that will refuse to be covered by the blood of the Lamb and the High Priest. And so, since they are not atoned for, they atone for it with their own death.
Kind of like a repeat of in Egypt when they were killed because they didn't have the blood on it.
That is exactly right.
And that's going to be after the 1,000 years.
Well, no, the Battle of Armageddon is after Jesus coming, but before we go into the millennium.
Oh, before
and so
we go into
I think that if the pattern fits, if the pattern fulfills, as I'm only suggesting, is that first day of the 7th month, the trumpet sounds, and Jesus calls his people together. 10th day, Battle of Armageddon. And then the 15th day, everything's wrapped up, and we begin the millennial period, and eternity itself even. Because the millennial period is just a temporary thing to kind of sort some last things out.
Okay, so you're saying, okay, the Feast of Trumpets seems like, okay, that's when Jesus comes down.
I think so.
And I heard some people teach about that where, okay, the Feast of Trumpets, now since, children of Israel are around the globe, okay, that could be actually like spread out in 2 days.
Sure, because of the global time zones.
Right, and I don't know all the details, but it had something to do where that feast doesn't start until there is the priest or whoever it was looking for the appearance of the moon.
Right, first crescent moon of the month.
And they were relating that to, okay, well, Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour. Well, okay, there's a feast where, okay, it could be 2 days, so you wouldn't know what day, and you don't know what hour because you don't know when you're going to see the moon. It could be the clouds, or
it could be as simple as this. In the Greek language, the word "know," our English word "know," has several different ways that it appears in the Greek, and the one that appears in that passage that we were talking about, that no man knows the day or the hour, is the one about personal knowledge, experiential knowledge. And the fact of the matter is, even if we speculate, we don't know for sure.
Until it happens.
Right. I mean, every morning when I get up, I could go, well, Jesus might come back today.
Right.
But I don't really know. So that's still true. I mean, he might pop up, but the fact that I can't be positive about it because I don't have that inside track with God fulfills that passage.
And only God the Father knows, according to what the Bible says there. So, I mean, the Holy Spirit wouldn't reveal that to us ahead of time.
Yeah, the only thing that I would go with on maybe a slight change to this is that if Jesus does come back on the first day of the 7th month, then we know that he's coming back at the end of the 3.5 years. So it's really, once the 3.5 years begins, then it's pretty obvious what the clock's going to look like. Because we know that the two witnesses are going to do their work for 1,260 days, which is exactly 10 days short of any 3.5 year period on a Jewish calendar. So they seem to be killed 10 days before Jesus' coming. They resurrect, 3.5 days after their death, which would be 1 week before the second coming of Jesus. And of course, all the bad guys are trying to scramble around and get their stuff together in the valley of Armageddon in order to stop that from happening. Then,
all right, well, that's 1,260 days. Okay, so that's based on a 360-day.
No, it's not.
No.
You'll have some people that'll talk about it like that. But one of the things, my real big specialty is working on chronology. And so I spent a lot of time working in the Jewish calendar, and particularly trying to recover it. And the Jewish calendar is basically 2 years of about 355 or 54 days in length. That'd be 12 months of between 29 and 30 days in each month. And then you've got the long year that pops up about every 3 years. It's just because it has
The second Adar month.
where you have to have
And
this
then, basically
the second 12th month.
Okay, and then that's a pattern of like 19 years that repeats
That's
itself.
right, every 19 years, but it pops up every 3 years. You have that
Right.
extra month that's thrown in there. Now, it's never counted as a 13th month. The word in Hebrew that's given to it is and Adar. It means, and we're going to have it again.
Oh, okay.
So it's always the 12th month a second time.
Second time around. Okay.
Yeah, so
And I've seen that where I forget. I think it was a Jewish website. They're trying to lay out a pattern how you can remember it, and they laid that out where it matched the keys on the piano, and I don't remember exactly how they laid out, but I mean that's
where you have some
interesting.
skips.
Where it would match music, where there's things that God created,
Right.
a cycle that God created.
So the thing is, in answering your earlier question, is that the long year that happens about every 3 years is 384 or 85 days long, and so that pattern holds very tight. So that means any 3.5 year period is going to have at least one long year in the midst of it. And so that means every 3.5 year period on a Jewish calendar is exactly 1,270 days long, always. So that means that the 1,260 days of their prophesying is just 10 days short of the 3.5 years. You'll also notice that it's talked about in the book of Revelation as being 42 months. So it doesn't count that extra month, which is very Jewish, because that's not a 12th month, or it's not a 13th month, it's the 12th month over again.
Okay.
Well, then that is the first thing popped in my mind. Okay, we talk about they don't count 13. It was kind of like the 12 tribes. Okay, could be 13, but
They always count them as 12.
12. Okay, because you got Ephraim and Manasseh. It could be 2 or.
Well, Ephraim and Manasseh replaced Joseph. And so Joseph was pulled out of the count, and his 2 sons were put in, but Levi had already been pulled out of the count because he represented everybody spiritually. So it always ends up being 12.
Oh, okay.
Because 12 is always such an important number.
And Jesus had the 12 disciples, and then but there was a 13th one, but he replaced Judas.
But yeah, because Judas betrayed,
But
and so
it
he
seems
emptied
like,
his place.
God uses these numbers a certain way, but he's eternal, so I mean it's uses the same patterns throughout the whole Bible.
Pattern is a very significant thing when you're looking at the Bible. I just love it.
Now we're going to start, how are we doing on time? We're going to start wrapping up here. Of course, the question for everybody when we go through all this is, okay, but how close are we? Gut feeling, when do you think that this, in my opinion, you look at everything that's going on with technology, science, politics, they're messing with the gene codes. I mean, everything is just like, okay, how long can this go on before God says enough?
People have asked me that, and I have to acknowledge, I don't think we're going to be in dress rehearsal much longer. I really expect that things are going to wrap up soon because of a lot of things that you mentioned. I mean, God cannot be letting some of this stuff continue and His program of salvation still be effective, because some of these things that they are doing in the world is trying to undo some of God's things. I mean, the whole idea of messing around with the genome, they're trying to make it where people don't die.
Yeah.
And yet God made it very clear.
Right.
That's part of the fallout from the original sin.
That's why God had the angel guard them from getting back into the Garden of Eden to the Tree of Life.
Yep.
So they, then they would have been in that sinful nature, like in an undead state.
Yeah, that's right. So messing around with that, I think, pretty much indicates that God's not going to let that go on much longer. We also know that things will be similar to the days of Noah, that things were trying to go on like normal. They wanted it, but suddenly it's going to happen. The Timothy passage says they'll be talking about peace and security, and then sudden destruction will come upon them. Well, here's another little interesting thing. When I was doing a word search on those two words, peace and security, I was doing it in the original language of Greek. And I threw it up online. And lo and behold, the Greek version of the United Nations Charter popped up. And I'm like, what in the world? And so I pulled it up in its English equivalent and found out that this was one of the goals of the formation of the United Nations, is to promote peace and security. And I'm like, wow. So even they are kind of fulfilling this idea that we're the ones that are going to do this, and God's going to go, no, well, I'm going to put a stop to this, and we're going to bring the real stuff in.
Prince of Peace, and everything else is counterfeit.
Yep. And we see also things kind of falling apart here in the United States as well. It's possible that God might rise up, another very strong witness elsewhere in the world, but the light of Christianity here in America is growing dimmer and dimmer. We know that. We see it. And we are the largest percentage of Christians concentrated in the entire world. I think it's something like 11% of all Christians in the entire world live here in the United States.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
But we're losing ground.
Yeah.
It's becoming less and less significant in people's lives. And I'm reminded that one of the things that Jesus said to his apostles, he says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find the faith upon the earth? Mm-hmm. And the way that he asks it in the Greek language, it expects a negative answer.
Yeah.
So it almost seems that things will be way on the decline when God finally pulls the plug. And I do see us rapidly falling along that direction here in the United States. And it makes me sad, but it also kind of gives me some hope that it doesn't matter how bad things get, we know that Jesus Christ is coming back.
We know the outcome.
We're going to win.
We know how the story ends.
That's right.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a falling away. The Bible talks about.
Yeah, we
first.
talk about the apostasy happening, and we certainly see that exemplified.
I believe that that's what's going on, and the devil's people, they know that, or the devil knows anyway, that right now we have freedom to read the Bible here, or, study the Bible, but now it's getting harder to say things like preach about, warn about sin, without having backlash now as far as
everything's twisted. It's when people talk
people
about
say, well, you
Christian
hate
and
crimes
Bible,
or whatever.
That's considered hate speech now.
It is. Everything is topsy-turvy. And we kind of see that also predicted. It was exemplified in the Old Testament. I mean, during the time of Isaiah and the other prophets, they sometimes talked about woe to those that call evil good and good evil. That was their time period before judgment came on their nation. And so we're seeing very similar things happen again. So I think all told, everything does seem to be kind of falling into place. And I am sure that if the other side gets even a chance to start their little program to try to do what the book of Daniel describes will be happening, which is to try to rub out, the saints, that they would certainly do it.
And we're seeing that in other countries.
Oh yeah, they're massing for whatever they can do to do in the saints. So we've just got to do like Jesus said, and watch and live our lives for Him, no matter what happens. The book of Revelation, in one of the letters early on, says that to him who overcomes, I will give the crown of life. And so we've got to stick in there, do the right thing, and let Jesus sort the stuff out and give us that crown of life that we're looking forward to.
Good advice. Good advice.
Right.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for coming on the Prophecy
Thank you
Brothers.
for inviting me.
Right.
And what's your website again? People can go to.
It's www.intotheword.net.
Intotheword.net. Great. And then we're going to have on the website, like we said earlier, we're going to have a PDF of Thomas's teaching, Living in the Last Days. You can download that, learn about that. If you have any questions, want to learn more about what Thomas is doing in his church, go to his website. And we will see you next time on the Prophecy Brothers.
There we go.
See you next time.